what a year for the space trio to have. One has stagnated, the other one has humiliated itself, and the last one just minded its own business. Whichever one you quote-unquote belong to, like a so-called soy boy simp or whatever the kids say these days, the 2020 certainly has been kinda empty. Now, in my previous similar types of videos, I've gone into some detail as to where each of these stand and what they have achieved in the recent while, so for today I'll try and provide a little bit of history plus, of course, what has been achieved in 2020. Now let's then start in alphabetical order. Now let's see. Elite Dangerous has provided people with extremely immersive design and feel as well as incredible sound design. While somewhat plain looking for a modern era, its graphics are okay and still are, but the textures sure are starting to show their age. Still, Elite is that kind of a game that takes the most realistic approach, both in the gameplay as well as the visuals, lore, and look. A game that has a massive sandbox that mostly is empty, but still you can't deny that it's a one-to-one scale of this galaxy, the Milky Way. Unfortunately for Elite, ever since it was released, it was dubbed as a kilometer-wide, centimeter-deep type of a game. And rightfully so, as everything is procedurally generated, and very few things are handcrafted or even placed. And on top of that, such thing as balance really never existed. Can you imagine that? Still, the beauty and sometimes the gameplay too can be indeed the main things that are a big draw for the game. But still, I think most people play Elite for the immersion aspects, even if they don't admit it. I mean, it is one of the best things. As for the 2020, this is the last year of the arguably 3-year semi-maintenance phase that the game has gone through, and though the developers officially are claiming that it has about 100 people working on it, most, according to devs themselves, are working on the newly announced Odyssey expansion that will introduce the so-called space legs finally. Many people are as excitable as 14-year-olds seeing the neighborhood's Ginny's panties, but Yamix is still sitting here waiting for some kind of clown shoe to drop. Maybe it will be cool, or maybe it will be funny. Well, it's too early to tell regardless. But it does look promising for sure. However, it's worth mentioning that the update was technically planned for the end of this year. Yeah, it's not coming out until the early 2021 now because of, well, the state of the world, obviously. In the meantime, we got one new thing, one update, the Fleet Carriers, which ended up being the most disgusting show from Frontier Development's team, almost enough to show that they don't play their own game. It truly was an abysmal display, as the Fleet Carriers still possess really bad mechanics, not to mention how it was first described. Now, I did talk about this and vented about it plenty, and I'll link some videos down below for it. To basically put, it was not pretty. But aside from that high or low point, depending how you see it, there were some actually really good news. With Odyssey coming soon-ish, developers have injected back a little bit of story into the game and promise to even do so for the next 2 years. The news of returning weekly events and a little bit of story is a godsend, especially compared to the only other update we've gotten. And I gotta say, some of the rewards they started giving out for participants of these things are quite nice, if not always making the best of senses. And that indeed was everything for this year. Very empty, as I said. Next then up is No Man's Sky, the one that got real good. Coming from the disastrous launch of overhype, overpromising and outright lying, developers decided to just keep their heads down and little by little turned one of the biggest industry horror shit shows into a darling. And I can't believe it myself, but indeed, starting with smaller updates that rolled into larger ones, No Man's Sky redeemed itself and continued to improve and deliver great content for the people. This quite arcadey, consolified, space sim light game, though very much being that still today. is oddly relaxing and engrossing with its somewhat cute and vibrant art style and easy controls. And while I understand that for a lot of people that would be exactly the immediate turn-off, well, so is my voice too. And people still watch my shenanigans, and for that I say thank you. And indeed, I bet Hello Games would say thank you to those that stick around to play their game too. As for this year and what has been accomplished in it, well, let's see. Starting the year with the Living Ship update, which granted was very unique and cool, was a massive grind with waiting timer garbage. Yes, the thing is nice, but to put the same repeating grind and waiting loops to artificially extend the gameplay is not. Now after that there was an update with mechs that personally I didn't really care for much, but hey, if that's your shtick, then oh, let's go. What I'm more interested in was the quality of life updates, and there were actually quite a few of them. Now instead, what became a quite a little but rather punchy update later on was the crossplay update. Yes indeed, not only with the multiplayer added last year, but now adding the ability to play with everyone was just such a nice addition. If only other games would do that. And the fun didn't end there. Next update, Desolation, brought some horror themes to No Man's Sky with the derelict freighters. Again, adding a few extra quality of life changes that I love to see, but most importantly, man, all of this stuff was small stuff. It really is small compared to this year's biggest update, the Origins. Now, I promise I won't describe everything about it, but safe to say, new planet types, biomes, weather, anomalies, multi-star systems, even those freaking sandworms that fanboys jizz their pants for, are added. Still, I truly cannot tell you how incredible it is to look at No Man's Sky and the amount of new crap, and not only that, more importantly for me, refinement of the existing stuff, and the old even, keeps on piling up every year. And all of that just makes its colleagues rather embarrassing. And finally, Star Citizen, the crowd-funded project to make two video games. The Star Citizen, that is the multiplayer version, and the Squadron 42, that is the single-player movie video game with star-studded cast and incredible detail. And to this day, Star Citizen project has raked in 370 million American dollars. No, not 37, 370 million, making this the most expensive video game of all time. Now, Star Citizen is more visible portion of the project, where company still crowdfunds the game's creation through actually selling spaceships for real money. And I'm not talking about small amounts. There is a bundle that sells for $35,000. And of course, you can only view that bundle after you've spent $1,000 in the first place. And that bundle includes everything that they're selling, mind you. In of itself, Star Citizen prides itself on ultra high quality and detail. Models are mega poly assets while textures are incredibly detailed, which you gotta admit are impressive. The attention to detail, especially when it comes to those sold ships, well, at least when they're not just a JPEG, are awe-inspiring, I'm not gonna lie. Now, those that are unfamiliar with Star Citizen, it's impressive, true, but not necessarily all good, mind you. So it has been 8 years since its initial announcement, and the project is still in alpha, currently 3.11 state, with absolutely no end in sight. Developers avidly avoid to talk about finished game or even mentioning the topic of beta, and that should probably tell you a little bit of what's going on. On top of that, it was noted that Chris Roberts himself mentioning Squadron 42, remember that single player portion, that thing should be going in beta starting around the middle of this year, yet nothing's happening. Well, nothing right away. See, developers came under some backlash from fans asking where the promised updates on Squadron 42. And finally, after some rabble, official statement came that basically developers are working on a roadmap for Squadron 42. I'm not even kidding about that one. Now granted, just recently they did release some more stuff about the Squadron 42, like a couple of videos showcasing the minor things about Squadron 42, that ultimately meant really nothing, but however appeased a few fans. As for the main game project, the Star Citizen, the multiplayer one, The year almost started with 3.8 update. They added Microtech Planet to that one same system that currently exists. And yes, there's only one system for now, even though they did promise, I think, 89 total systems. Then they added some minor changes to flight model and the law system, but all else is so minimal it's not really worth mentioning. Oh, and new ships, of course, how could I forget new ships? Then the 3.9 came after some patches and brought some smaller level of persistence. Yes, until that point, every patch and update would wipe your data that you had accumulated. I mean, it is alpha, I guess, but still. Well, anyways, the big thing here was the prison gameplay. Yes, indeed, that's a thing. Sure, some interesting but frankly, ultimately rather annoying and time-wasting gameplay. Then they added 2 more planets, or should I say, Microtech moons. And that's about it. Oh, and sorry, I forgot about the new ships, of course. After that, in 3.10, the player trading app was introduced and NPC AI improvements for a fucking bartender. Oh, Jesus Christ. But seriously though, some extra work was done for flight model revamp, which frankly I'm still on the fence myself. And finally, the 3.11, the shittiest update yet. I tell you, while I was trying to film some ships for my quote-unquote review series, every time I alt-tabbed out of the alpha, it's not a game, right? So, application maybe? Well, yes. The thing would crash, and it was unbearable, horrible, and downright incompetent. Oh, and did I mention that no matter which version you play, you're probably not gonna see a number on the frame rate counter that is higher than 60 or maybe 80 if you got a really good CPU. The performance throughout all of these years has never been good or even consistent. And you have to remember that. Because of course this is alpha and making an actual game is not a priority. Selling spaceships is. Anyways, the new things in this update, aside from the horrible crashes that are finally fixed, was the hangar decks that are just modeled environments and nothing else, UI improvements, and some planetary visual changes. And that's about it. No more new ships. Oh wait, sorry, what am I saying? Of course there were new ships! And that's the whole year of 2020 for both Squadron 42 and Star Citizen, at least for now. And am I the only one who thinks that only Elite Dangerous, by doing nothing, actually accomplished less than CIG this whole year? Like really, when the only way to do less is by doing nothing, man, you're reaching new heights. Or maybe lows. But in any case, this is the 2020, the so-called cursed year. And it's interesting to see what each of these particular today's subjects did accomplish throughout the year. Now, of course, the year is not yet done as of making of this, and, well, there is potentially a room to improve, but in the next 2 months, I kinda doubt they're gonna pull out the biggest things. Still, it was rather interesting look at the accomplished things for the year, so hey, if you enjoyed this sort of a video, well, do subscribe, and hey, if you want to support, do check out the Patreon as well. But as for now, now that I think of it, there's a clear victor of this particular one, which is weird, so I guess I'm gonna go and play that one. Now, as for the next year, well, it sure as hell is gonna be interesting for one of them. As for other two, well, I'm sure one of them will at least surprise us. As for the last one, well,